There are several ways to project your model into UV space: the automated way, the quick way, and the reliable way. The automated way is garbage, and we'll never talk of it again. The quick way is great when you actually know what you're doing. Some shapes don't want to play along, though. The reliable way, which I'll introduce today, will always work no matter what. It's just slow and tedious. But I always teach it because if things go wrong with the quick way, you'll need something to fall back on. I don't want you blaming me for not knowing what you're doing when crunch time comes. Now, the first thing we need to do, move this out of the way a little bit, is to look at the shape. The reliable way primarily involves breaking this shape down into surfaces that are basically pointing in roughly the same direction. For instance, let me turn off that checkerboard real quick. The top of this car is basically pointing in one direction towards the top. The side is pointing towards the X. The opposite side is pointing towards the negative X. The front is pointing towards the Z. The back is pointing towards negative Z. And the bottom is pointing towards negative Y. That makes things a bit easier. I'll skip the spoiler for now. It's a little bit more complicated. But sometimes it's not just whether or not it's one cardinal direction. You could think about this as this one's pointing up, this one's pointing up, but this is pointing at, a mix between Z and Y. Depending on your shape, you might have to rely on that as well. For instance, there is a very sharp change right here. If you have really sharp corners, you generally don't want to include them with your selections of where you want to be, a top-facing group of faces. Which is why I'm keeping this separate. There's just too much of a sharp change right here. This is a gradual enough slope, I can probably get away with it. So first things first, I'm going to select my relatively top-facing faces. I go to face mode. I can start selecting these one at a time, but that gets a little tedious. So instead, I like to use the paint select tool, which is over here below the two select tools. I get this little brush or the red circle, and whatever I click and drag this red circle over gets added to my selection. A little slow at the moment, but if I hold down the letter B as in brush, and then left mouse drag to the right, I can change the size. Right makes it bigger, left makes it smaller, and I should be able to grab more at once. Just be careful though, sometimes you wind up grabbing things that you didn't want to. To deselect, hold down Control and paint over them again. Generally, I like to select around the edge of my intended selection, and then afterwards, I go a bit wilder on the middle. Now, I am going to deliberately leave a couple of the faces out, these little skinny ones here, but not all of them. I'll get that one too. Oops. I'll leave these ones out on purpose so I can show you what to do if you miss them, and then go back to selecting. By the way, just because you're using the paint select tool does not mean that at any point you cannot just hit Q to turn that off and then deselect these the old-fashioned way, or reselect them the old-fashioned way. I also like to use Shift, click, double click to select loops like this when I can. Normally that's what I would have done at the front windshield, but I'm leaving those out on purpose so I couldn't do it. All right, now we've got our initial selection. Up here under UV, you see cylindrical, planar, and spherical. Now, cylindrical and spherical are useful if you're working with a cylindrical or spherical selection. This isn't, so I'm going to use planar. I'm going to go over here to the option box, and it's going to do a quick reset settings to make sure this is the default, which you should all be seeing if this is the first time you've used your planar projection. As it's originally set up, set to bounding box and x-axis, which means it's going to project in the direction of the x-axis, which, as I mentioned before, is from the right side right here. I'll hit apply. We can see what that looks like in here. And that is kind of sort of what these look like from the side if they were crushed down into a little square aspect ratio. I'm going to use my scale and stretch that out. You can see that's what this is right here. There's that, the windows, there's the front of the car right there. I don't want that. If instead I use, say, the z-axis, do it from the z-axis, that's the front. That's what it looks like from the front view. Also don't want that. Like I said before, this is pointing towards the top, which is the y-axis. Project that one, you can see, well, that looks more like the top of the car, the top view, like that. Now that worked just fine in this particular case, but not every group of faces that we want are going to be perfectly lined up to one of the three directions. Sometimes it's going to be an angle, like I mentioned before. And quite frankly, having to constantly go through here and figure out which one of these will work best gets a bit tedious. There's also camera, which then depends on which direction your camera happens to be pointing, which could work, but honestly, the easiest way to do this is to click Best Plane, which will just look at the way the faces are pointing and say, well, you know what? That would probably be the best plane to project these from. Also, you notice how before these are always being squished like this? If I set this to keep image width height ratio, this will keep it the same ratio that it would be in real life when it's projected in here. So let's take a look and see what that does. Apply. And there we go. It didn't have to worry about which of these was set. Didn't have to worry about stretching out afterwards. It just grabbed it from the direction it was supposed to be and threw it into my UVs with the aspect ratio that it should be. Take a look in here and turn on our checkerboard. The checkerboard is very important because these, well, they kind of represent where your pixels are once you start painting the map later on. Pixels are all square little shapes, which means that these squares don't look like squares here. Your pixels aren't going to look like squares later on, so you're going to get weird little distortions in your textures. Stretches and twists and all kinds of things. You can see what the UVs that have not been finished look like. The little squares are all kinds of weird shapes. Some of them are just twitching because Maya does not know how to display them. They're so bad. But even the one that we just projected, as you can see it's mostly squares, gets a little twisted down here. That's because this shape right here is not 100% flat. We grabbed it from a direction pointing kind of like this, and while some of these faces are pointing directly towards where we projected it from, some of them are tilted away. Because they're tilted away, they're going to be technically three-dimensional in my UVs. Close that. We want to make sure these are completely flat. Turn my checker pattern back on again. We do that over here in the UV toolkit under a section called Unfold. Now, there are multiple methods of unfolding, and you may meet someone who prefers tools that I never use, and they may hate the tools that I use, but these are the ones that I personally find work for my process. I either use Unfold or Unfold Along. Unfold is really good for organic shapes. Unfold Along is really good for mechanical shapes. Now, this is a car you would say would be pretty mechanical, but it's a very round car, so let's see what happens if I hit Unfold. There you go. Look at that. The squares are now square. And now I can set that aside. Oh no, look in here. These white lines mean that I'm missing something. These are border edges. Well, how do I fix that? By doing the exact same set of steps that I just used for this, and then stitching them in. Now, I haven't really written out the steps yet. I just went through them really fast. Let me just write down what the steps are that I always do. 1. Select the faces. Whatever method you use, you just click on them, shift double click, use the paint selection tool, whatever it is, grab the faces that are all pointing in a single unified direction. Planar project. I know it's just called planar, but it is projecting it. That will always create right here in the center of my, well, I like to call it the junk pile at this stage. It's 0 to 1 space, but with all the bits and pieces that are unfinished from the rest of the car, I call the junk pile. 3, I then have to move it out of the junk pile because it's really hard to work with it when it's in here and all the rest of the junk is on top of it. And 4, unfold. Once it's unfolded, you can do whatever you like with it. Move it around, you can scale it, you can rotate it. That's not going to matter for the time being, but these are the 4 things you have to do before you can move on to anything else. So I want to do those same 3 steps right here. First, I select those 2 faces and I go to UV planar to project this. And because I already set my settings in my option box, I don't have to keep going to the option box. I can just click the word planar and it'll automatically do this the way I want it to. 3, move it out of the junk pile. And 4, unfold it. Now, there wasn't much to unfold. It was a pretty flat shape already, but I always hit the unfold anyway, just beyond the safe side. Next, these now exist as 2 separate shells. I want to combine them together into a single shell. So I'm going to right click, go to edge mode. I'm going to find all the borders where these should be attached. Click those to highlight them all. There we go. And then under cut and sew, which I demonstrated in my previous video, stitch together. And there they are inside. Now at this point, I'll mention that oftentimes when they're stitched together, there is a slight distortion. But look at these two shapes right here. They're not identical. This is a symmetrical shape. The UV should also be symmetrical. This has been slightly distorted trying to jam this shape into the pre-existing one. So I'm going to select the shell again, unfold again, and you can see a slight adjustment as that move the UVs around. And now the top is finished. I will say, in normal circumstances, I would remove the windows, but I don't feel like taking the extra time to do that right now. This is just an overview of concepts. Next, I could grab, say, the front of the car. Oops, make sure I'm in face mode still. I'll use the paint select. That should be fast enough. Make sure I have anything extra. There we go. And then UV planar project. There it is. I'm not going to worry about the angles. It's tilted at a weird angle. I'm not going to worry about that. Unfold, and there it is. The side of the car. Now, like I said before, I would probably select the faces separately for the windows normally, but if I want to do all this really fast and have it all as one piece, here's what I would do. I'd select a face, shift double click next to it to grab all the faces in that circle, shift click this one, shift double click the one next to it to grab all those in a circle, and then use the shift greater than keys on my keyboard. It's the little arrows to the right of the M on your keyboard, in most QWERTY keyboards anyway. The left one points to the left, and that's less than. The right one points to the right, and that's greater than. So greater than spans that outwards and grabs all the ones touching those selected faces all at once. And now I can select the rest of these faces really fast with my paint selection. By the way, if you accidentally select something that has already been projected, you'll see it right here. I can hold down Control and just drag over my pre-existing faces and deselect them without having to fight with it on the model. Step 1, select. Step 2, project, planar. Step 3, move. And then step 4, unfold. You see how that kind of bent upwards in a weird way? That's not what my car does. It's starting to flex it in strange directions, trying to banana it. I'm going to undo that. If this happens to you, this is where unfold along comes in. Now, unfold along allows you to unfold it in one direction at a time. U is the left and right, and V is the up and down. So if I want this to sort of pull like a bed sheet, grab the two ends of the bed sheet and just pull it straight from one end to the other, I'm going to start with my V and then unfold along. And that stretches it that direction. Well, technically, I guess it collapsed it, but it still flattened it. And then I go to U, unfold that direction. If I go back to V again, very little changes. In fact, the more times I jump back and forth, the less I can see anything adjusting. And once it stops doing anything in either direction, I can say, well, that's probably finished. If I look at my checker pattern, all nice and flat over here. Do that again on this side. Click, double click, shift double click, shift greater than. Paint selection for the rest of it. Great thing is the more of these faces you've already selected previously, the easier it is to just go into your UVs and just control drag over the ones that are selected by mistake. I always like to double check, make sure I didn't grab anything I didn't mean to. UV, planar. Step 3, move it out of the way. Step 4, unfold along. I'm going to start with V again. And it's already stopped moving for the most part. Just little twitches, that's fine. I'm going to jump all the way to the back of the car. Step 1, select. Step 2, planar, project. Step 3, move it out of the junk pile. And step 4, unfold. It's just the same 4 steps over and over and over again. I said it was slow and tedious, but it works. It always works. Now, the spoiler, I've got a little of a trick for. Normally, using this methodology, I would select the top and project that, and the back and project that, and the front and project that, and the sides one at a time and project those each. That's a little bit tedious, even for me. So instead, I'm going to go to the side view and just drag over all of these. And this works for pretty much anything that is just a boxy shape sticking out or into the surface. It works best if they're fairly shallow without a whole lot of shape, like just a square poking in or poking out. But it also works with this if you're careful. Start by selecting, finish that, and then move on to planar. And there it is right there. Move it out of the junk pile. If I were to unfold this now, it's not very good, is it? Look at the checker pattern on this. That ain't good. If you're ever unsure as to the quality of your UV layout, check your checkers. That's what they're for. Undo that. Instead, I'll go to my edge mode, select the 4 edges along the side of these. I want you to imagine this like a cardboard box that you have to take out for recycling. You're going to grab a box cutter and slice the corners wherever you need to. It will allow you to flatten this out without having to fight with it. Otherwise, you're just stomping the cardboard box to death under your feet. So with those 4 corner edges selected, under the cut and sew section, I'm going to cut those. No big change. Deselect though, I can see that these are now border edges, which is what I want them to be. Select my UV shell, and let's see whether or not unfold or unfold along works best for this. I'll start with unfold. Ah, perfect. Look at that. See that? Laid out nice and flat in one go. Let's check our checkers on that even. Look at that. Perfect squares all the way around. The last part for the body of the car is the bottom of the car. Fortunately, that is all that's left in our junk pile, provided we didn't miss anything, which can, does, and has happened in the past. But if you don't miss anything, everything that's left in here should just be whatever you haven't gotten around to yet, pretty much. If I hit 4 and I see any orange anywhere else in my model, I can say, oh, I missed something, but it doesn't look like I did. So I can just grab all these right here, planar project, move them out of the junk pile, and let's see what happens if I unfold it. That worked fine enough. Look at that. And that is the body of the car laid out completely. Back to checkers. And you'll notice some of these are different sizes. That will be fixed later when I get to UV layout itself. Right now I'm just projecting them and cutting them up and making sure they're flat. However, I might say, look at this and go, well, you know what? This is kind of an important part of the car. I don't really want to have a seam right here. Well, depending on how well it flattens after you reattach these, you can stitch these together. Matter of fact, I believe, in my experience, I found I can stitch all of these together. Just not these bits right here. Make sure those are not selected. There we go. So I'll attach the front to the top of my car, the spoiler to the top of my car, and the back of the car to the spoiler. I don't want to include the side. If I leave this selected right here, it'll stitch the side of my car to it as well. Stitch together under cut and sew. And there they all are. Just keep in mind that whenever you stitch together UV shells, you have to reselect the shell and unfold it again. Otherwise, you will have weird little distortions in it. If I did that before I unfold it, I can see right here maybe. Yeah, you can see how these are a little bit twisted because they're trying to jam these two shapes together. Unfold it, now they're straight again. Now, for the wheels are all identical. You really only have to finish the UVs on one of them, and then you can duplicate them afterwards. So if I select just a single wheel, isolate select to hide the body of the car. Here's the thing you have to remember about wheels. They are cylinders, basically. And if you try to figure out where the faces are pointing towards the top or towards the side or towards the bottom or towards the front, it gets a little bit hard to do with cylinders because they are round. There is no obvious top or bottom on these things. What's important for cylinders is you just grab half of them. That's all that really matters here. So I'm going to turn off my checker pattern so I can see what I'm doing. It's a little blinding sometimes. I'm going to grab from here down to the bottom right there. Just use my shift and shift double click. I'm ignoring the pre-existing edges on here, but I will say that these ones kind of make sense. I can't select the entire tire because otherwise it will unfold cleanly. So I'm going to have this split into left side, right side, outside, inside, and then a couple parts for the interior. I've got half of that selected and then projected, moved out of the junk pile. I'm going to show you something real quick before I move on to step 4. I then select the other half. All right, like that. Project and move it. Because these are the same shape, no matter what I do for my unfolding, whether it's unfold or unfold along, it's going to be the exact same steps I'll need for both of these, so I might as well just grab them at the same time. Let's see what happens if I unfold it. You know what, that's better than it used to be. It used to be it would get kind of twisted, so I would have to use the unfold along to unfold it that way first and then this direction. But you can see it's basically the same shape, only slightly less angled. I can use either one of these, I think, for that. Next, the tread of the tire needs to be as much one single shape as you can, just to make it easier to paint later on. And you have to ask yourself, where do I want the seam? Do I want the seam up here at the top where everyone can see it? Or do I want to keep the seam on the bottom where no one can see it? Because there is going to be a seam. If I try to stitch both the top and the bottom at the same time, oops, both these ends are selected. If I try to stitch those together, they're just going to sit on top of each other with a weird broken end. That's not going to work. If I try to unfold that now, it's going to try and turn into a circle, which I don't want this to be. I want this to lay out flat so I can see where my tread is. So I'm going to undo all that. Well, in case the answer wasn't obvious, I want the seam to be on the bottom where no one can see it, which means I have to stitch together the top edges. Grab those, stitch together, and as always, unfold them again, and there we go. Next, I'll grab the side of the tire. Probably doesn't need to be unfolded, but I'll do it anyway. Yeah, it made no difference. The way to do this would be the same way that we did the outside of the tire, which is to select half of it, like that. There's one half. The other half. Might as well do the other side as well. Unfold that, and there it is. And once again, I have to decide where I'm going to stitch them together. And in this case, if you're looking down at the car, you're going to see this seam, not that seam. So it'd make more sense to grab this one and stitch those together. Now all that's left is the center of the tire, and honestly, that's probably not a whole lot left to do on that one. It's already flat, but I'll do it anyway. Planer, unfold, yeah, made no difference. Planer, unfold. Wow, a lot of effort for that I didn't need to do. Bring these back, and the important thing to do at this point is to remember all of this has been saved in your history. If you save your scene now, the history will be saved in these objects, and sometimes that causes Maya to glitch. So whenever you're done with your UVs for the day, always go to Edit, Delete by Type, History to clear all that out. All right, I'll worry about how to lay this out in a different video.